All right, so I got a clip here from Congressman Mo Brooks from Alabama, who really comes out and not only says the quiet part out loud, but pretty much in this leaked video that we got from the Undercurrent, pretty much just comes out and explains in full detail exactly how corrupt our government actually is. So this is a video when he was essentially speaking to some constituents, I guess, and he's describing the process of committee assignments within the House of Representatives and how some members end up sitting on those committees, basically utilizing corporate donations and bribes essentially to then go serve the interests of corporate America who put them in those committee positions. So let's go ahead and hear what he had to say.
That y'all are very much concerned about why our Congress is so unresponsive to the regular needs of American citizens. Why some of these policies that come out are so bizarre, so unfair, so skewered against regular Jane and Joe citizens. The reason is simple. Special interest groups run Washington. And I don't mean that metaphorically, I mean literally. Now, here is how it happens. In the House of Representatives, I'll use that as an example because that's where I work. If you want to be chairman of a major committee, you have to purchase it. And the purchase price for a major committee, say like Ways and Means, minimum bid is $1 million. Now I'm talking literally here. I'm not talking metaphorically, okay? We have committees broken down by A group, B group, and C group. C are the cheapest, B are the most expensive, are middling, A is the most expensive. It's the most expensive because those are the committees that the special interest groups care the most about. So where does a congressman come up with $1 million to be chairman of one of these A committees? You can't get it from Joe and Jane Citizen because Joe and Jane Citizen back home, they're not going to be contributing that kind of money. They don't have it. They need that money for their own families, okay? So let me finish. And so you have to get it from the special interest groups. And with the special interest groups, there is a quid pro quo. If you don't do what they tell you to do, they won't give you the money that finances your chairmanship. I had one guy.
All right, so he continues describing this process, but you just heard it right there. I mean, he literally says there is a quid pro quo, meaning corporations within corporate America are bribing politicians, giving them the $1 million or $500,000 or whatever they need to get onto these committee assignments. And then there's a quid pro quo in exchange for these corporations putting them in these committees. They're going to turn around and not legislate on behalf of, as he said, your average Jane and Joe citizen. They're going to legislate on behalf of the corporations that just bribed them. I mean, listen, this isn't any secret. We talk about the political corruption that exists within this country all the time on this channel, and this is just one avenue of it, specifically with the committee assignments that he's talking about. But there's also shit like this. I mean, I talked about this story multiple different times, but from Business Insider, they say at least 15 lawmakers who shape U.S. defense policy on the Armed Services Committee have investments in military contractors. So it's not just the committee assignments where corporations are bribing politicians to get them in those positions. It's also the fact that once they're in these positions, a lot of them have the somehow legal ability to invest in the same corporations that they are legislating on behalf of. I mean, it's just rank corruption. This is how a motherfucker like Joe Manchin ends up sitting on the top of the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, a guy who is a literal millionaire coal baron who has a direct financial stake in the fossil fuel industry, and then he turns around and guess what? He does the bidding of the fossil fuel industry. Crazy how that works, and opposes all meaningful climate legislation to tackle what is arguably the single most important issue facing humanity right now. So listen, I mean, this guy is coming out and admitting this. He's saying the quiet part out loud, but he himself is also a participant in the corruption that he's talking about in this clip here. So I mean, if you just go and look at some of the donations that he himself is personally getting from a lot of these different industries. I mean, he's getting some from, real estate, from the defense industry, from manufacturing, from health professionals, securities and investment, etc. You can go down the line. This guy is not a principled anti-corruption politician, okay? So he's just a part of the swamp that he is laying out here and describing exactly how it works. But listen, I mean, at the end of the day, this isn't too surprising. We understand that the United States is not an actual democracy. We don't have representatives that actually serve the interests of working class or even middle class class or even average Americans within the bottom 90% of the country. They serve the interest of our oligarchs. They serve the interests of the top 1% and the corporations who are legally able to bribe them. So at the end of the day, it's a pretty simple lesson. We shouldn't allow this fucking bribery to continue existing in what is supposed to be a functioning democracy. You shouldn't have corporations have the ability to finance elections. We should have public financing of elections. We should have more direct ballot initiatives where Americans are able to bypass the corruption within Congress and can directly vote on some of the top issues. Maybe you do it every election cycle. You pick 2 or 3 big national issues. Maybe it's legalizing marijuana. Maybe it's letting Medicare negotiate prescription drug prices. It could be so many different things. Let the American people directly vote on it, and we'll skirt directly around the corruption that exists within Congress. But again, these are just a couple different aspects. You have the committee assignment briberies. You have the fact that corporations are able to finance our elections. You have the fact that politicians are somehow still allowed to legally engage in what is effectively insider trading and profit from stocks that they are directly manipulating the prices of via the legislation that they allow to be brought to these committees. So it is important at the end of the day that this is how our political system is operating, and it gives you an insight into how exactly our system is failing average Americans. Because of course, if you take hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars from these corporations, you're going to have to engage in a quid pro quo. You're going to have to pay them back in one way or another. And oftentimes, because of the nature of a capitalist system inherently, when you serve the interests of capital owners, you are directly harming average working class Americans. And we see that, with all of the different legislation that is able to be brought forward or not able to be brought forward in front of these committees in the first place, like, us not being able to get a legitimate hearing on Medicare for all for years and years and years, despite its popularity. You can look at this in so many different ways, whether it's, in the Build Back Better legislation that got eviscerated by corporate Democrats and Republicans alike. I mean, this was a piece of legislation that had upwards of, 60, 70, 80% support, depending on which policy you're looking at within it, and yet it got completely eviscerated. It got kicked into the dirt by just a couple of corporate members within the Democratic Party who take bribes from corporate America, and then what do you know? They turn around and they serve the interests of corporate America. I mean, it's, again, not that complicated, but at the same time, it's completely egregious, because this is the type of corruption that in an actual functioning democracy would be considered criminal. I mean, this is the type of shit that we should be throwing politicians in jail for, because he's openly admitting exactly how corrupt and swamp-like our government in Washington D.C. has become, and yet he's not proposing any solutions. He's a participant in this in the same way that Republicans and corporate Democrats are participants in this. So that's why it's so hard to actually address the problems of corruption within the U.S. political system, is because the people running the U.S. political system are directly profiting from this corruption.